It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. It's time for The Verdict.
And hello again, welcome to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're here every Sunday morning talking about legal issues, topical issues, and today I think a subject that a lot of people are going to learn something more about, something that they know a little about, but they're going to know a lot more about at the end of the show.
Well, and I think a byproduct of this show that isn't always true on all of our shows, Mick, is that I think once our viewers turn off that TV set after our show's over, they're going to feel a good bit of pride in Oklahoma and in what Oklahomans are doing. That isn't always the case on the subject that we feel like is important to cover. We, both your grandfather and my grandfather were involved in the oil and gas business early on, and probably, as you talked to me about a little bit before the show, probably built a bunch of the rigs that may have been left over after the drilling ceased. We're going to be talking about the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board and have Mike Terry, the executive director, here to talk with us about that, about how Oklahoma is being cleaned up, and we are the first in the nation to do it.
OERB, more about it coming up on The Verdict. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Today, we're very pleased to have Mike Terry, the executive director of the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, joining us to talk about just what that organization does and how it functions. A little bit about Mike. He's a native of the oil fields in Seminole, Oklahoma, where much of our initial drilling started, grew up there. He got his undergraduate degree in business at the University of Oklahoma. He's been in both banking and in the oil business in the past. He joined the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board in 1993 as their first executive director and remains there today in that same capacity. He's married, has two daughters, and Mike, this is your first visit to The Verdict, but we hope not your last. Welcome.
Thank you, Ken.
Mike, let's go back to the early 1990s. At some point, there must have been some urge by somebody that we need somehow to clean up a lot of these oil well sites. Nobody else in the country was doing it. Why here? And tell us about those early decisions.
Well, Oklahoma has such a rich history in this business, and we think that at least 500,000 wells have been drilled in our state, and you know, early days, environmental concerns were nothing like what they are today.
And that's 500,000 wells in a relatively short period of time compared to other states. I mean, from the early 1900s on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There have been cleanup efforts in other states, but none of them have been set up really like here in Oklahoma. And we're using, as we'll talk about, voluntary contributions from today's oil and gas industry to restore old problems.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, whose idea was it? I mean, who was at the legislature? Who was pushing for this?
Actually, the idea came from the industry. We had leadership within the industry that for years wanted to do more to educate Oklahomans about this important industry. You know, the image of the industry has not always been the best. And then we had an environmental void in our state, if you will. We didn't have a program that would actually clean up the surface problems. We had a program to plug old abandoned wells, but nothing was out there, no resources available to actually clean up the surface. So that's how this whole thing came together, and it was talked about, I think, for years before actually a group got together within the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association, and they were leaders there that said, you know, we need to do something. We need to fund it ourselves and do something that will both clean up the problems that exist from a historical era and then also educate. And so that's what happened. And when these leaders went to the Oklahoma legislature, of course, they said, well, that sounds like a great idea. Self-funded program to do these things, no state money, goes into it, then great idea. So there was no reason not to say yes to that.
I imagine the legislature loved it. I mean, here they get to create it and tell you what your mission is, which we'll get to in just a second, but also not have to fund you.
That's right.
It's a funded mandate, as a matter of fact, from private funding. Well, let's talk just a minute about your mission. What is the OERB's reason for existence?
Well, it's twofold, and as I touched on, it's the environmental program is critical to what we do. It receives at least 50% of the funding, and then the other half goes into educational programs, and so the mission is twofold, and of course it's evolved from the day we started. We weren't really sure exactly what type of programs and just how everything would work, but it's proven to be successful. It's proven to be something that other states are looking at. Oklahoma took the lead in this, voluntary contributions to a program that would do environmental work and also educate the people of Oklahoma.
Well, who does participate? Who are the people that contribute to making this possible?
Anyone that receives any revenues from the wellhead are contributors to the OERB. And it turns out that's hundreds of thousands of people. Because you have the big companies, the major companies that contribute. You have all the independents in the state. Even the royalty owners that own the rights below the surface are part of this. They receive part of the income, and so everyone that receives income pays a 0.1% assessment, and that goes into a fund just for the OERB.
But that's voluntary.
It's voluntary because at the end of each year, any of those people that contribute can get their money back. And that's really what makes this program so unique. It's a true checkoff. You've heard the word checkoff from the agricultural industry, the beef checkoff, the wheat, the milk, and some of those programs are mandatory, but this is truly a checkoff. So if people don't want to participate, they don't have to. The good news is about 95% of the funding has stayed with the OERB, so we're getting great support from the industry here in Oklahoma.
Let me ask you, just in round numbers, how much do you take in a year that you would expend on site cleanup?
Our budget this year is $4.25 million, and it's the largest budget that we've had so far. And we're planning on cleaning up about 1,200 sites with that. So somewhere in the $4,000 to $5,000 per site is kind of the average. But the sites range from small to large, and they're all over the state. So, but $4.25 million is our current budget.
I think what a lot of people know about the OERB is what they've seen in your television commercials, and that sometimes you see a school teacher, sometimes you see a football player being carried off the field, but I think we've seen a little bit of what your charge is. Let's show one of those TV commercials to try to make the connection so that the audience will understand, I've seen those commercials, that's who this guy represents. So I don't know which commercial this is, let's just run it and take a look.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods. We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites. We called the OERB, and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. It didn't cost us a thing. Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
Well, beautifully done commercial, first of all.
Thank you.
But I guess the message there was that they had a problem and you were the solution.
What we tried to do is inform Oklahomans about this program through the media. And we have found that the most effective way to do that is to let real people tell the story. In this particular case, this was a Campfire Girls camp near Tulsa. And they called. They'd seen the commercials, matter of fact, and they had some sites that existed on the grounds there. They felt like there was some danger involved in that because they didn't want girls approaching that and falling or getting hurt, and so it became a real priority for us. And so we came in, we were glad to do the work, and then we just let the campfire director tell the story. So the testimonials, I think, have been the most effective way to tell this story, and so we've used real people to do that over the last 4 or 5 years, and I think it's been effective.
I agree. Let me jump in and get us to a break. We're visiting with Mike Terry, the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board. More to come after this. Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Our guest is Mike Terry. We're talking about the OERB. And I want to talk to you about the cleanup. First of all, how many sites have you cleaned up around the state of Oklahoma?
We just recently completed our 6,000th site, and it was interesting because it actually was here in Oklahoma City. And part of the work that the mayor is involved in, and I've heard that as many as 5,000 wells have been drilled in Oklahoma City proper.
Well, if you've seen any of those pictures from 1928 or whatever
Oh,
in
yeah.
the city, there had to be at least that many. I mean, it was almost wall to wall. You know, one thing, and I know I'm interrupting you to a sense, but I think in my mind, if you had said, they're going to go out and clean up an old well site, I think I would have thought, well, there must be some, like crude laying on the ground, or there's some puddle, and that's what a cleanup is, an environmental cleanup. But really, it's going out and there's a lot of wooden structures and cement and structures, so you're really kind of pulling out some of the infrastructure that supported a lot of these wells.
That's right. I mean, we see a multitude of things, but the average site consists of concrete and structures and trash and debris, old pipelines. Really not that many sites contain crude oil on them. We do have some of that. But as a matter of fact, the toughest sites to clean up are the old what we call saltwater scars. In the 20s and 30s, saltwater is part of the production of crude oil. The two go hand in hand, and so today we have methods of disposing of the salt water that don't harm the environment. But in the 20s, they just let it go on the land. They just didn't know better. They were ignorant. And so it kills the grass, and it causes, ultimately it causes problems and gullies and unsightly things. And so those are the toughest problems that we deal with. We're dealing with one right now in the tallgrass prairie, which is something that is one of the most beautiful areas in our state. And but we have ways of dealing with those kinds of problems.
We have a graphic that shows the state of Oklahoma that shows where these wells were constructed that you have gone in and cleaned up. And what I thought was dramatic was the number that were in Seminole County. I know these numbers are small and it might be difficult for our viewers to pick out the numbers, but that's 4 digits in Seminole County, and they can see 1 digit and 2 digit and kind of get an idea where the 3 digits, that's where the production is, but 4 digits in one county, what's going on there?
Well, Seminole County is one of the most historic oil fields in the state, and it was part of the state in the early 20th century that really brought Oklahoma to the forefront, and it spurred tremendous economic activity, just like the Oklahoma City field did. but the Seminole Field was earlier than that. So consequently, there's been a lot left behind. And, you know, our job is to go in there and take care of that. And it just so happens that we've done over 1,200 cleanup sites just in Seminole County. Wow. And that's ongoing. But it's because of the history of that part of the state.
You know, Mike, what you do is described on your website very appropriately as reclamation. That's a word that I think needs to be thought about just a minute, because what you're really doing is allowing the people to reclaim their land. You aren't just taking out the things that they might fall and hurt themselves on. You're putting the land back in much better shape than it was when you found it, and probably close to how it was before the drilling ever started. Your commercial with the football field and all, where they're out playing football on an old site. You're really genuinely involved in the reclamation business, are you not?
We are, and you know, if we don't make the majority of the landowners happy, then really what are we accomplishing here? You know, our goal is to bring it back to its normal, natural productivity. Now, in some cases, it goes beyond that. You know, like the football field or the campfire site. You know, recreational is also part of that. We've probably built 300 or 400 ponds in the state. Well, landowners love that. And in some cases, that is the most efficient use of our funds to take care and reclaim these areas. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to take care of the problems, and we work with the landowners to try to do that.
Let's change subject just a minute away from the reclamation. And I know that OERB does a lot of work with schools and with school children. I'm not sure that's widely known, but can you tell our viewers about what you do?
It is a big part of what we do. Early on, we determined that there was a lack of education in the schools about the oil and gas industry, and because it's so important to our heritage, our history, and really, if you think about it, everyday lives. I mean, energy propels everything we do, even our homes, our businesses, whatever. And we just believe that students in Oklahoma deserve a chance to learn about that. We looked at textbooks. There was very little in the textbooks about oil and gas, and some of that was negative, pictures of oily birds and different things. So we have brought to Oklahoma pure science curricula and activities that help teachers, help students learn about this industry and what energy really means in their lives, and where
now,
it comes
that would go
from.
beyond just the counties in which there are sites.
Oh, absolutely.
It would go statewide, I take it.
It's a statewide program. In fact, our curricula, which we have curricula for all grade levels now that have evolved in our 11-year history, our curricula is out there in about 67% of all the schools now. And it's totally voluntary. It's not a mandated program. We've received tremendous support from our administrators, from our teachers, and from Sandy Garrett's office to do this.
The Department of Education.
Department of Education. And they have been behind this. They've seen the programs. They've endorsed the programs. So we do more energy education in our state than any other state in the country, and we're proud of that.
What do other states come and say, Mike, what are you doing here? Can you tell us about it? Are you involved at all in helping other states get similar programs started?
Interesting that the OERB concept, one of the things that started it was the need for something nationally. And there was an effort to take this nationally, and that effort failed 12 years ago. And so Oklahomans said, well, let's do it here first, and let's show the country that it can work. There are programs that I've been successful in helping create in Ohio, in Illinois, North Dakota. Now that may sound a little strange. You'd normally think of oil-producing states, Texas, Louisiana, Kansas. There are efforts underway in those states as well. And I just returned from Houston last week to talk with Texans about trying to get something like this going. And they're eager to do that.
Well, what do you see down the road, Mike, for the OERB in regard to 5 years, 10 years down the road? Are you going to start doing some things you haven't been doing? You're going to keep on doing what you've been doing? What's your prediction?
Well, it's hard to, we don't really have a true estimate of how many sites exist out there, but numbers like 25,000, even 50,000 and more have been thrown out there. And if we've cleaned up 6,000, then we still have a lot of work to do. And, you know, we're just looking for more ways to do our programs even better, to benefit the landowners even more.
Tell you what, why don't we, during the break, I'll get your website information. We'll give that website information at the end. That way, if people out there, they know of a situation that maybe your group would want to come in and investigate and perhaps help these people out, they'll be able to get in touch with your group. Fair enough?
Great.
Mike Terry, we appreciate you coming on. We learned more about the OERB, and congratulations on all the good work you're doing.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we get back. He's Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We learned more about the OERB with Executive Director Mike Terry.
Yeah, Mike's a great guest, and he does a fine job, and Sorry about that.
That's all right.
It's my Donald Duck impression. Daffy Duck.
We're still rolling. We'll do it.
Okay.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Today's guest was OERB's Executive Director Mike Terry, and we learned a lot.
Yes, we did, and just remember last Sunday Scott Meacham said the #1 economic resource in this state is the oil and gas business, and here is a wonderful example of a big producer of wealth for the state coming in and kind of looking at the other side of the equation and cleaning up messes at no expense to the taxpayer and at no expense to the landowners. It's a wonderful program, and it's great that Oklahoma is #1, at least was first in doing that around the nation.
One of the things that Mike mentioned to us was that the OERB is constantly looking for abandoned well sites that they might need to get involved with. So I was going to give their website information, so you might go on there and contact them if you know of a site, and they might be able to help you out. It's www.oerb.com. OERB.com. Happy 4th of July. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.